Hey, it's Ben from Last Resort Network. If you liked our video on movies you should watch from the 1960s, I have a little companion piece here. I was thinking about music a lot recently, and I realized that a lot of my favorite albums come from the 1960s. In fact, 6 of my top 12 albums are from this era. Because of that, I thought I'd make a quick countdown of my top 6 albums from the 1960s. The 1960s, like with cinema, was a transformative era for music. It was during this time period that rock music exploded onto the scene, thanks to the Beatles and others, but mainly the Beatles. Beatlemania swept across the nation, and this really catalyzed the genre in an interesting way. A lot of these albums are going to be featured on my list. I won't ramble on for too long, so let's get started. Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys is the most unique album in their discography. Brian Wilson actually viewed this album as a solo album, which is likely why it is so unique in comparison to the others in the Beach Boys discography. His goal was to create the greatest rock album ever, arguably mission accomplished. It's very introspective, and it lyrically is very personal to Wilson. Had a lot of jazz and avant-garde influence. Personally, I like this album individually more than any Beatles album, although I think the Beatles do have a stronger body of work overall. I guess it kind of spoils that controversially I will not have a Beatles album on this list. The rest of the boys were really only utilized for their vocals, and the instrumentation was done by producers and various studio musicians. There was heavy usage of non-traditional instruments and sounds, and this album is often credited with changing the music production process because of the influence of producers and studio musicians along with collaboration with Wilson. The album is not super long and it makes good use of his time, which is something I really appreciate. The result was a joyful album that exudes with the love of music and exploration. I would not argue with anyone who thinks this is the best the 1960s has to offer. For me, the best songs are That's Not Me, Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, God Only Knows, Wouldn't It Be Nice, and I Know There's an Answer. Often seen on these lists, the Velvet Underground and Nico's inclusion is no surprise. However, I believe this album truly earns its spot. Of course, this is the staple of the avant-garde movement in the late 60s and is often credited for aiding the rise of punk, being labeled as a proto-punk album. This album has a really fascinating history. So the Velvet Underground was associated with Andy Warhol. As you can see, his painting is prominently featured on the cover of the album. And it was Andy Warhol who insisted on the inclusion of Nico on the project. The band's 2 most prominent members were Lou Reed and John Cale, whose careers would significantly diverge after this project. Naturally, the subject matter is mainly related to drugs and other deviant behaviors, showing the seedy underbelly of New York. Some of the songs were written about Warhol's cast of superstars who would parade around with him, rather than Reed's own personal experience, although I'm sure he did draw on his experience as well. The album has been incredibly influential on different variations of rock that would emerge during the 70s and 80s, and in many ways it feels way out of place in the 1960s, feeling way ahead of its time. It wasn't very popular when it was released, but of course we look back at it now as a classic. It's funny how that always happens. Its vision of drug use and overall deviance is perhaps a little closer to reality than the LSD hippie vision during the same era. You can make arguments about whether it glamorizes drug use. However, when I listen to it, I don't get the vision that drugs are a good thing. It just sort of paints the reality of the life that was going on for the people who were surrounding Reed, Cale, and Andy Warhol at this time. In my opinion, the best song on the album is Heroin, which is an epic 7-minute song. I'm Waiting for the Man is also good. Femme Fatale, There She Goes Again, and Sunday Morning. The last 2 songs on the album, the Black Angels Death Song and European Sun, are definitely the most avant-garde. So if you really want to push yourself and listen to something that's just way out there, listen to those 2. But the whole album has bits and pieces, even though some of the songs end up being more like pop classics. There are many tragedies in the world of music, and sadly, Nick Drake is among them. However, he made music just long enough to truly impact music, especially in the genre of folk. His debut album, 5 Leaves Left, is the one that touches me the most, although all of his albums are incredible. Much of Drake's success was found long after his tragic death, emerging in popularity in the early 80s. Drake notably recorded many songs on this album without overdubbing, preferring instead to sing with the backing musicians. Many of the songs on this album have been covered by other artists, like Riverman and Cello Song. The album has profound lyricism and haunting vocals. I really like the inquisitive and open-ended qualities on many of the tracks. If you are unfamiliar with Nick Drake, he is a musician worth spending time with. Best songs on the album include Way Too Blue, Riverman, Time Has Told Me, Thoughts of Mary Jane, and Cello Song. I do not pretend to be a jazz expert in the least. I have listened to many of the popular albums the genre has to offer, but not much else. A Love Supreme stands as the most transcendent jazz album that I have listened to, along with Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. This album is a suite of 4 movements, and the refrains that are repeated and returned to are classic and memorable. The last movement is often noted as being poetry without words, which is such a fascinating way to look at music. Coltrane is someone you simply cannot miss out on. It's a little harder to describe jazz music, so you'll just have to trust me and check this out if you have somehow missed it. The best songs on the album are all of them, as it is just a suite of 4 movements. The debut album of the legendary band The Doors is an album that defined psychedelic rock in the 60s. An argument could easily be made that Light My Fire is the greatest song of the decade. The Doors worked on this album while touring after the formation of the band in 1965. Jimmy Morrison's raw vocals are memorable throughout the record. Their song selection is very interesting, as they included a rendition of Kurt Weill's Alabama Song from a German musical. A 6-ish minute instrumental break is included in Light My Fire, which couldn't have been popular for pop radio stations. And the improvised style of the end just speaks for itself. That is the magic of The Doors. The ability to make standard pop tracks like Break On Through to the Other Side, but also featuring rambling epics throughout the album. If you have ever seen the band perform live in video, it's definitely worth watching. They are hypnotizing to watch. My favorite songs on the album are Light My Fire, The End, Break On Through to the Other Side, The Crystal Ship, and 20th Century Fox. And we close with my second Beatles-esque record that I like better than the Beatles. Odyssey and Oracle has been impactful on my music listening journey ever since I first heard This Will Be Our Year randomly on Spotify in high school. Odyssey and Oracle is a true odyssey of perfect psychedelic rock music. It encapsulates much of what made music great during this era. The songs are short and to the point, but they pack a punch. And the album ends with a memorable closer, Time of the Season, for which the Zombies are now mainly known. Recorded under tight constraints, as it was the last big shot for the band, the pressure of the moment created a resounding success. However, it did spark tensions in the band, and they split before album release, which adds to the album's lore as a cult success. Other elements, like the artist who created the album art misspelling Odyssey on accident, don't hurt either when considering this as a cult success. The album evokes a comforting feeling while listening, and is one I continually return to. It is interesting how projects that cause in-the-moment stress and tension, such as this one, can turn out to be some of the most impactful in retrospect. It's an interesting observation, but it doesn't mean that it should be copied as a formula for bands. My favorite songs are Carousel 44, This Will Be Our Year, Time of the Season, Beechwood Park, and A Rose for Emily. Those are my favorite album from the 1960s. Let me know yours, and let me know if you disagree with mine. I'd love to argue about it all day in the comments section below. If you like this content, like and subscribe, of course. This has been Ben from Last Resort Network, your last resort for movies and more.